Again, at Calvary Chapel. So I've slowly been going through the book of Daniel. My hope is to finish this by the time my kids graduate. Don't have kids yet. So this week we'll be doing Daniel chapter 3. So if you guys want to flip over there. And as a quick reminder, we start off with Daniel. And often we think of these stories as stories. But we need to remember this is history. So this is the history of the Jewish people. This is the history of our faith. This is the history of what made Christianity. So when we first studied Daniel 1, that's where we met Daniel and his friends. And at this point, they were taken from their homes. They were taken from their families as the Babylonians conquered Israel. And one thing they did in trying to strengthen their kingdom and weaken others is they would move people around. So here they took the most promising people, and they were good looking. But they took the most talented, the most smart, the most influential people and put them in Babylon. And they prepared them to serve the king, to be advisors, counselors throughout the region. So these were teenagers, and the first thing that was being done in their preparation is they were given food from the king. But our Hebrew friends here, they purposed in their heart. It said that they made a decision before any of this ever happened that they would not defile themselves. So the main point we learned in chapter 1 is to make up your mind now. And for our teenagers, as they're going through a lot of temptations and new things, and their friends trying to introduce them to things they shouldn't, if they've already made their decision early, then they're more likely to make the right decision. Same thing with us as adults. If we already decide what our decision will be, when we get there, the decision's already made. And as a result of them staying firm to God, they were honored and blessed, and they impressed the king, and it said that they were even 10 times better than all the other people. So they were given great honor. And then when we learned in chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar had this dream. And it troubled him so much, he wanted to find out what it meant. So he got all the wise men together again. And he said, "Please, tell me this dream." And the people responded back to him and said, "O king, live forever. Tell us the dream, and we'll tell you the interpretation." But again, the king, being a king, he's a smart man. He knew their games. He knew their tricks. And he knew they were fake. So he told them, "You need to tell me what the dream was and its interpretation." That way he would know what they were saying is true. And of course, everybody responded back to the king that no one can do this. So he explained it to them more clearly, that if you don't do this, I will kill you. So with them being unable to, the command went out to start killing all the wise people in the kingdom of Babylon. And that's when Daniel got wind of it, and he asked the king's servant what was going on, and he heard the story. And it says with great counsel and wisdom. So he sought the advice of God, sought the advice of others, and he got word back to the king that give him time and he'll do it. So then he went and got with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and the 4 of them prayed. And through that prayer, Daniel was given the dream and the interpretation. Excuse me. So Daniel was able to see the dream, which was this great image of this statue. It said it was awesome. And we learned that it had different materials, and they were actually representative of kingdoms through times. Because as Daniel told the king, it said, "You were shown a dream of what would happen in latter days." And expressed that had the head that was made of gold, which represented Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylon kingdom there, and how it was greater than all others, and it had dominion over everyone and everything. But then after it, another kingdom would rise, which was represented by the chest and arms made of silver. And we learned that was the Medo-Persian Empire, which took over the Babylonian Empire. And then we heard about the belly and thighs made of bronze, which represented the Greek Empire, which came after the Persian Empire. And then we saw the legs and feet which was the Roman Empire, and then the feet were iron mingled with clay, which that's the kingdom we're still looking for, which some call it Rome number 2 or Holy Roman Empire. So we're yet to see what that's actually going to be. And then as we were hearing about this, we saw this rock that came out and crushed the feet. And we talked about how that rock was Christ, how that rock was Jesus. And it said in the Word that at this time God will set up a kingdom, an everlasting kingdom. So we know Christ is coming back. And through all this, Nebuchadnezzar was impressed, and he was excited. And again, he honored Daniel, and Daniel honored Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they got moved up into more power in the kingdom. And that gets us to chapter 3 here. So even though Nebuchadnezzar just saw this, he saw the witness of God, he was impressed, he already's forgotten. He's already fallen back into his prideful state. So starting here at Daniel chapter 3, and again, interesting part, this part of the Bible is written in Aramaic, where usually it's mostly written in Hebrew in the Old Testament and Greek in the New Testament, but here this part is written Aramaic to really put emphasis on focus to the Gentiles. And as remember, the Jews are in a Gentile area right now. So it starts off in chapter 3, verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its width was 6 cubits. It doesn't give its depth, but I'm willing to suspect it was 6 cubits. So here we're hearing 666. So we're already thinking about what? Who is the man whose number is 666? The Antichrist. So we aren't going to get into it today, more Wednesday, but Nebuchadnezzar is actually a type of the Antichrist. And again, with the Antichrist and Satan, their biggest fall is their pride. So here we're seeing him, Nebuchadnezzar, getting caught up in his pride. So here he's made this huge statue to himself out of gold, and it's about 90 feet tall. So it's huge. And it says here, he set it up in the plain of Durham in the province of Babylon. So because he put it in a plain and it was 90 feet tall, you could see it for miles around. So anybody coming by in the area would be able to see this. And really in doing this, he's trying to set up one common worship, one common religion, which is again touching in some of our end time stuff. So it says, and King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, and the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. So these, we're getting all the important people. The satraps are just governors over large areas. So we're getting all the important people to come and for the dedication of this image. And then we list them again. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you is commanded, O people, nations, and languages." So we got people from all over the world here where they've conquered and brought them into this kingdom. O people of peoples, nations, and languages, at the time that you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, the psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. So here we are, we got our image set up, and then whenever we hear this music, all the people are commanded to fall down and worship. And one thing we need to be careful is music can be very dangerous. So who remembers when Satan, before he fell, what was his job? Music. He was leading worship. So we'll see throughout the Bible a couple times that Satan is trying to get in here by trying to take worship away from God and direct it elsewhere and often to himself. And one thing we got to be careful about music, it gets into our hearts, right? It gets into our minds. So without any purpose growing up, I know all the words to Ice Ice Baby. Does anyone else know all the words to Ice Ice Baby? Maybe it's just me. What about Shake It Off by Taylor Swift? But for the different music we listen to, the words get in us. And we don't realize it, but we'll be walking around singing this song, whether it's appropriate or not. But then you flip that around, how much scripture have we memorized? So music has a way of getting in us without any effort at all. But scripture takes effort. So anything we're doing for God takes effort, and it's worth that effort. But we got to be careful because, again, Satan, music is his tool. And a lot of the songs now, part of it is put your hands up, right? What does that look like? Worship. So it's little things that are sneaking in there that seem harmless that catches us. So continuing here at verse 7, it says, "So at that time, when all the people heard the sound," and we keep saying this over and over again, heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, and the lyre, and in symphony with all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. So here, they got this idol. And one thing about idols is they're idle. They don't do anything, right? But for some reason, we keep trying to worship them. Whatever it is, whether it's something physical or something we're into, one of our hobbies. It's easy to fall down into something distract us. So an idol can really be anything that takes us away from God. But here, we're focusing on this idol. And if we flip back 4 or 5 books to Isaiah 44, here's a great passage where I'll just read through it all and you can follow with me, where it's talking about idols. So it says, starting in chapter 44, verse 9, "Those who make an image, all of them are useless, and their precious things shall not profit. They are their own witness. They neither see nor know that they may be ashamed. Who would form a god or mold an image that profits him nothing?" So again, these idols profits anybody nothing. "Surely all his companions would be ashamed, and the workmen, they are mere men." So the people who make these idols are men. Men can't make a god. "Let them all be gathered together. Let them stand up, yet they shall fear. They shall be ashamed together. The blacksmith with his tongs works one in the coals, fashions it with hammers, and works it with the strength of his arms. Even so, he is hungry, and his strength fails. He drinks no water and is faint." So here the blacksmith is making an idol, but because he's a human, it wears him out. He's tired. You know, humans, we need to keep eating and drinking to sustain our energy. So the stuff we make is less than us. Same thing with God. We're often getting caught up into worshiping what God has created and forgetting that God is the creator. "The craftsman stretches out his rule. He marks out one with chalk. He fashions it with the plane. He marks it out with the compass and makes it like the figure of a man, according to the beauty of a man, that it may remain in the house. He cuts down cedars for himself. He takes the cypress and the oak and secures it for himself among the trees of the forest. He plants a pine, and the rain nourishes it. Then it shall be for a man to burn, for when he will take it, and for he will take some of it and warm himself. Yes, he kindles it and bakes bread. Indeed, he makes a god and worships it." So here he's taking the wood, and half of it he's using for firewood, and the other half he's using it to make an idol. So it's just mocking the whole mindset that this substance that we use for normal everyday things can become a god. "He makes a carved image, and it falls down to it. He burns half of it in the fire. With this half he eats meat. He roasts a roast, and indeed is satisfied. And he even warms himself and says, 'Ah, I am warm. I have seen the fire,' and the rest of it he makes into a god." So we're repeating the exact same thing here, that we're taking half this wood, making a god, and the other half making a fire, but still the God we made, we're bowing down to it. Often as humans, we get caught up in trying to save the earth, protect the wells, which is good. We need to be good stewards, but we need to realize that we're number one. God put us number one on the earth, and his word tells us to enjoy and subdue the earth. That part of that is protecting it, but part of that isn't going out of the way and hurting humans and trying to protect the animals. Remember when the Ebola was big in the news, and We had all these people dying in Africa. But what got people going is when they put a dog down. It wasn't all the people that was suffering that got the attention. It was because we put a dog down to make sure we didn't spread the disease anymore. So that's where, as humans, we are always going the wrong way, and we need to focus on what God is trying to tell us. Continues here, his carved image, he falls down before it and worships it, prays to it and says, "Deliver me, for you are my God." So we look to God for our salvation. So here, this example, they're looking towards the handmade idol for salvation. You know, we know in Ephesians we can't even save ourselves. It's a gift from God. So how can this idol do it? They do not understand, for he has shut their eyes so that they cannot see, and their heart so they cannot understand. No one considers in his heart, nor is there knowledge nor understanding to say, I have burned half of it in the fire. Yes, I have also baked bread on its coals. I have roasted meat and eaten it. I shall make the rest of it an abomination. I shall fall down before a block of wood. And that's all it is, fall down in front of a block of wood. So just be careful that idols, we can make an idol out of anything. And it's going to take our time, take our distraction from God. And if we put that above God, we're completely misled. So flipping back to Daniel, here at verse 8, where the plot starts to come out. So therefore at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke to the king, King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever." So right here, they're sucking up, right? So I see it at work where people suck up and just kind of, ugh. So that's what they're doing here. They're trying to get them going. "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, and the psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fire. There are certain Jews." So here we go. We're seeing what's happening here. "There are certain Jews who you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you." So here, we're seeing what's going on. So these same people were probably prompting the king to set up these rules about if you don't fall down and worship, you'll be burned. Because they knew that the Jewish people will stay true to their God, particularly these three here. And again, if I'm remembering earlier, these three were elevated. So they were put above the other Chaldeans in the area, so there's jealousy there. So trying to get power back, we're trying to knock them down a level. So, and remember, these were young guys, too. Last time we were talking about them, they were teenagers, so they're probably still pretty young here. So again, the Jewish people are taking power away from other people in the area, so trying to find a plot of how to eliminate them. And they say here, "O king, that they have not paid due regard to you." This is not true. So they were serving the king. They were part of making that image known. They were part of managing the different areas. So they were serving the king to the best of their ability. The problem here is that they just weren't worshiping this image, which isn't a problem for them. So then we see here that Nebuchadnezzar responds. He says, then Nebuchadnezzar in rage and fury. So here the king is trying to control everybody, but he can't control himself. He lost control here. He lost his temper. So that's one thing that we see, it's kind of often with us, is when we're trying to control something, we lose control of ourselves. So he gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, "Is it true?" So here we got to give them some credit. Usually, in a situation like this, they'll just jump and act. But here, the king is actually checking in. What's the story? What's going on? He's giving them the benefit of the doubt. And I know through my own personal development at work, sometimes I'll hear a story and I'll jump and I'll accuse somebody, and then have to go humble myself and apologize. So through practice and screwing up, I had to develop the ability to approach the person and say, hey, I heard this. What's going on? And then often they can say, oh, well, these other events happened that led to this. Like, oh, I understand. Or they come out and say, well, da-da-da-da, like, then they kind of self-discipline, which is much better than me jumping on them, right? So he's given the benefit of the doubts. And if we flip to Proverbs 18 real quick, there's two things that are important for us to apply in our lives that reflect to this. So verse 13, it says, he who answers a matter before he hears it is a folly and shame to him. So one thing with our previous president and even our current president sometimes looks like they're acting too quick and making judgment before they get all the facts. And then it kind of makes them look less of a person when facts come out and the direction they were pushing was a little bit not true. And then in verse 17 it says, the first one to plead his cause seems right until his neighbor comes and examines him. So again, when we hear one side of the story, that's usually what we grab onto. And it takes a better person to go get the second half of the story and through the two halves put together the third, which is the truth. And one thing I'm guilty of or was as a kid, between me and my sister, it was always who could get back to our parents first, right? There was a much better chance if we could tell our side of the story first that things would go better for us, even if we had to shape it a little bit. So again, it's best to make sure you get all the information before making a judgment. And here, to commend Nebuchadnezzar, that's what he's doing. So he's asking them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, this is little g here, my gods, or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now if you are ready, at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony, with all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the image which I have made. Good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God, little g, who will deliver you from my hands? So here, look how prideful he is. So this goes right back to his experience with idols. So because of his experience with the previous gods, he thinks that he is something. But he's just a man. We're just men. And even though he saw a couple times already how powerful the Hebrew God is, he's already quickly forgotten. And he's going to be reminded again today and then again in future until it actually sinks in. So through his pride, he's elevating himself. And it says in verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. So here, they're putting their trust in God. So just like we were singing right before the message, I will trust you. They are trusting God. And here, they aren't trusting God just to save them. They're trusting God either way. They're putting their faith in God whether God saves them or whether they die. And that's a true testimony. And that's where we need to be, because we are told as Christians we will face persecution. Right now in our country, we have very little persecution, but there's no reason for us to be arrogant to think that we will escape the persecution that all these other Christians are having to go through. So again, with purposing in your heart from the previous chapter, we need to decide now, when we do face this persecution, how will we respond? And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they've decided in their hearts how they're going to respond. And they're telling the king that, they're being respectful. They aren't doing anything out of the way. They're saying that we serve a higher God. And again, big G, our God, he is able to save us if he chooses. If not, we will still follow him. And it's difficult because in preparing for this, just trying to think, what would I do if I was there? And I'm afraid I wouldn't be as strong as them. It'd be easy to go, I'm just going to tie my shoe. I'm not worshiping just tying my shoe. God will understand. He knows my heart. God forgives. He'll forgive. But then also, too, a good excuse here that these guys were in power. If we get killed, how are we going to be able to influence the kingdom for our God? So there were a lot of ways that they could have taken the easy way out. And no one would have noticed. No one would have said anything. They would have just moved on. They weren't out there protesting. So they made the decision that they weren't going to bow down. And they were given a chance again to save their lives. And they told the king, we're making the decision not to bow down. And they're thinking, too, in the back of their minds, the commands that God gave them. So if we flip to Exodus 20 real quick, where we're given the 10 commandments. And one thing we often don't realize is that really the 10 commandments, if you don't follow them, the punishment is capital punishment. So for us as believers, anytime we break any law, any of God's law, any sin separates us from God. And that separates us, the penalty of that is death, right? The wage of sin is death. And for the Hebrew people, these laws were capital punishment. If you didn't follow them, they weren't always enforced, but that's how serious this was. So either way, in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's mind, if they bow down, they're deserving of death through God. If they don't bow down, then they're deserving of death through the king. So either way, they're deserving of death. So reading the first 2 commandments, it says, you shall have no other gods before me. And you shall not make for yourself a carved image of any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them, for I am the Lord your God, am a jealous God. So he's saying very clearly, don't make an image, don't bow down to it. And again, that's what's happening. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are put on the test of these first 2 commandments. And they're saying that they'll stand firm. And then also, if you remember from the example of Exodus 32, the golden calf, right, where Moses goes up in the mountain to go talk with God, and he's gone a long time. And the Jewish people, are starting to go, where's Moses? He's not coming back. So in response, they took all their gold and molded a golden calf. And they started worshiping it. And I believe it was Aaron come out and says, look, Israel, here's the golden calf that saved you from the Egyptians. So, again, we keep seeing how quickly we forget what happened. We do the same thing. We're on a peak with God one moment, and we're in a valley the next moment. We always need to remember the peaks to help get us through the valleys. And then when Moses comes down and he sees what's going on, he asks, what's going on? And he gets the same story a kid will give. Oh, we threw this gold in the fire, and this calf jumped out. Come on. Is that believable? And remember what Moses did? He wound up taking that gold and grinding it and giving it to all the Jewish people to drink. So if you got any gold on you right now, it may have been recycled. Just saying. So flipping back to Daniel here, that these guys are actually staying true. And that's better than I'm afraid I would have done. But one thing that God will do is it says he will prepare us. So when we face these situations, he will prepare us. So just like we see in the news about ISIS doing these beheadings, and these people are standing strong, I'm feeling like God really prepared them for that. They aren't any better than you or I. I think a lot of these things take supernatural ability to be able to withstand. And it touches right back in the book of Revelation where it talks about in the end days that a lot of the martyrs are going to have their heads cut off, which seems so old-fashioned, but we're seeing it happen today. So it just reassures that the Bible is true. So continuing in verse 19, it says, then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury. And just a side note, there's a lot of cars in the Bible. We had a fury here. We got Accords. So the Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury. He lost control again. And the expression of his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he spoke the command that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. So here they're trying to get it as hot as it can be. And we know through numbers in the Bible, 7 is the number of complete. So they're trying to get it as hot as it can get. And he commanded certain mighty men of valor. So these were his best men from the army. He commanded his best men from the army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments. They were dressed up. They were looking good. And were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the fiery furnace exceedingly hot, the flames of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So again, the king just lost some of his best men. So through his anger and his stupid haze, he lost some of his best men. And I imagine these guys weren't in their flip-flops and their bathing suits. I imagine they were dressed the part to be throwing people into a huge fire. So it just shows how hot this fire was. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. One thing that I heard when I was studying this I haven't heard before, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with it or not, but it was interesting how if these 3 men were pulling Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to the fire, and they got killed, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were free, it kind of indicates that they may have jumped into the fire themselves. If that was the case, and they were trying to escape, why didn't they just stop, drop, and roll and get out? But the point they were trying to make is that they were so determined that whatever it would be, they were going to see through it. So then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, so we had a lot of witnesses, did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. Then the king said, look, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. So very likely here that this is a pre-incarnate Jesus walking around with the 3 Hebrew children here. And the king is seeing it. And all the other wise men in the area are seeing it too. And if we flip to Revelation 1, 13 and 18, we get an image of what Jesus looks like. And this may be what he was saying. So it says here, starting at verse 13, and in the midst of the 7 lampstands, one like the Son of Man, clothed with the garment down to the feet, and girded about the chest with a golden band. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow. And his eyes were like a flame of fire, probably much brighter than the fire in the furnace. And his feet were like fine brass, as if refined in a furnace. So we know he did go through a furnace. And his voice was the sound of many waters, and he had in his right hand 7 stars. Out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, his word, and his countenance was like the sun shining in its strength. And when I saw him, I fell down at his feet as dead. But he laid his right hand on me, saying to me, do not be afraid, I am the first and the last. So here we have the image of Christ, super bright and pure. And then also as a bonus, when it's Jehovah's Witnesses, they believe in God, but they don't believe Jesus is God. And if you ask a Jehovah's Witness, who is God? Oh, God is the first and the last. God is the Alpha and the Omega. Well, it says right here, Jesus is saying that he himself is the first and the last. And then if you step back to verse 11, it says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. So if a Jehovah's Witness is trying to witness to you, you can witness right back at him right here in Revelation 1. And I just ask him, who is the first and the last? Oh, Jehovah. Who is the Alpha and the Omega? Jehovah. Well, if it's Jehovah, then how can it be Jesus here as well? So continuing, here at verse 25, they see Jesus. The fire burned the ropes off the Hebrew children, but they're walking around in the mist. Everybody's okay. Then King Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God. So here we are. We're using capital letters. He now believes, or at least in this moment, come out and come here. He doesn't call the fourth. Why didn't he call Jesus? Why didn't he call the fourth? I think that kind of indicates that he's seeing, but he's not ready to meet God yet. So I think that happens to a lot of us. We may go to church, we may kind of do Christian things, but we never call on Jesus because we aren't ready to meet God yet. So we may be seeing all these great things around us, but it's up to us to call on God. So he says, come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth in the midst of the fire, and the satraps, administrators, governors, and all the king's counselors gathered together. There were a lot of witnesses. And they saw these men whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair on their head was not singed, nor was their garments affected, and the smell of the fire was not on them. So people are always trying to discount what the Bible says. So one thing they'll say about this story is, you don't understand, there was a cold spot in the fire. So we already went over that we heated the fire hotter than it's ever been before. It killed 3 of the king's best men just by being close to it. It was able to burn the ropes off of the Hebrew children, and they're able to walk around and walk out. And it says here, the fire had no power on them. The hair on their head was not singed. I know me, when I just light a grill, back when I had hair, it got singed. So these guys were in the midst of it. And then 2, their garments and the smell of the fire was not on them. Anyone who's near a campfire, you know, when you get ready to leave or you go home, your mama's like, whew, leave those clothes outside, take a shower. So again, the fire had no power over them. So there's no way it could have been a cold spot. And then if you look at the account of the eyewitnesses here, King Nebuchadnezzar, the most prideful man in the area, is not trying to find a way out. He's not the one going, oh, it was a cold spot. He's believing. And all these other witnesses are believing what happened. So there's no way around it. There's no argument saying that it really didn't happen, as the story says here. So it says, Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, blessed is the God, big G now, of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel, again, it's capital letters, so that's where it indicates it's Jesus, and delivered his servants who trusted in him, that they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against Shadrach, the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, shall be cut into pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, dung heap in King James Version. Because there is no other God, capital G, who can deliver like this. So again, he was impressed. He didn't try to find any way out. And earlier we were talking about the plot of trying to kill the Jews. We read in our history book here that time and time again, these plots come up trying to wipe out the Jews. And every time, something happens to save them. So I know the women were studying about Esther, where at that point they were trying to wipe out the Jews. And then in our recent history, we had Hitler trying to wipe out the Jews. And what was interesting with him is a lot of people don't realize that when the Germans started to lose the war, they didn't put more effort in trying to save the war or save their end of the war. They put more effort, resources into wiping out the Jews. So they realized that when they were going to lose the war, they had to step their game up on killing Jewish people. That just shows how dark the powers of Satan are in our world. And at that point, they were able to wipe out 1 out of every 3 Jewish people. The Bible says that when the Antichrist is here, at that point, 2 out of every 3 Jewish people will be wiped out. So if we think the Holocaust was terrible, there's another one coming that's going to be much worse. So we need to be mindful that the Jewish people are always being attacked, that they are God's chosen people and the world is against them. So in the UN, most of the rules that are made, I forget what term they use, but most of the rulings they make in the UN are actually against Israel, this small country. And recently in the news, where our president has done the ban of having people come from certain nations. And the media is really portraying it as a Muslim ban. It's not a Muslim ban. There are a lot of Muslim nations that the people are still welcome to come into our country. It's just the countries that are growing terrorists that we're trying to find a better way to filter the people that come in. And it's only supposed to be temporary. And I know there's the nation's very divided on this, but again, it's not all Muslims. It's just these certain nations. But then one thing I learned yesterday is that there are 16 countries that won't let people with Jewish passports in. So just through their hate, that they won't let Jewish people into their country. So there's a lot of exciting things that's happening in our times that are yet to come. So then, verse 30 here, the last one of our chapter says, Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So again, they were raised even to more power. So through their testimony, through them standing strong, they received greater honor. And then 2, I imagine there were a lot of Jewish people that did bow down to the image. And once they saw this and heard this, they probably felt left out. Because when you aren't serving God, you're going to be left out. God's doing a lot of things, and we want to be part of that. But if we go off and serve our own idols, we're going to be left out. So we need to make sure that we're staying true to our God in the commands He's given us and the laws He's written in our hearts. So we need to make sure that we often say, oh, we'll die for God. And in this example, they were willing to do that, but I think often it's more difficult to actually live for God. The Bible says if we try to save our life, we'll lose it, right? So the way we need to save our life is to give it up, to lose it. And I know with me, often I might feel a pull to witness to somebody, and I kind of push that away. That's not being faithful. That's kind of not wanting to be involved in what God's doing. So we need to make sure that we are doing whatever we can to be faithful to God and be involved in His work. Whether it's serving, giving, witnessing, there are a lot of ways that God calls us to be part of His work. And He saved us for a reason. You know, why did He handpick each one of us? For a reason. So we need to make sure we figure out what that reason is. And one Bible teacher I like, when he has a big conference, one thing he asks is, everybody raise your hand who is in full-time ministry. And he turns it on and say, you may not realize it, but everyone who is saved is in full-time ministry. So let me encourage everyone to make sure that they're reaffirming their commitment to Christ and being in full-time ministry. And if you aren't saved, make sure that you are turning to Christ and accepting Him so you can be a part of what is going on. So when we do the last song, I'll be over here, and Jennifer will be with me if anyone wants to pray. And just thank everyone for coming here. And just remember that this was a big thing, what these people did. But the way we honor God is in all the little things in our lives. That's where life really matters, is in the little things. And God says, if I can trust you in little things, I can trust you in big things. So, Lord, just thank you for being our God, and just thank you for this story here where we did have, where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego